water wheel was only the spark, and the girl blinked in shock. Who was this young man really? The boy clung to one last hope. This time he'd save his family. In Kyla, on the 513th year since the city was born, a man stepped forward and declared the executions for Baron Solis Tequila, Astoria's former ruler, were starting right now. Graphonia's northern detachment was handed the job of overseeing the execution, because they had to follow every single one of the rules they'd already agreed on. The prisoner suddenly caught a weird bell ringing out of nowhere, and nobody could figure out where it was coming from. Pain crawled back through his body, but the boy couldn't look away. There was a bearded man out in the street, rallying the crowd with a fiery speech. Then the young man realized he'd been dropped into the main square, where some stranger was openly talking about an execution like it was already underway. The puzzle snapped into place in the young man's mind, and clarity hit. Then he realized it. They'd come to execute him, and there he was, already standing, ropes tight around him at the stake. The crowd's faces practically screamed, "Stone him," and he understood why, because this place used to be thriving. His parents poured over 10 years into building it up, and the moment he turned 10, it all started collapsing fast. Disaster slammed into their home, floodwaters rose, and war raged, and when the dust settled, the hero's brother never made it back from the battlefield. Then an epidemic tore through the family, wiping out his parents too, until he was left standing there with no survivors at all. It was just him, an ordinary guy with no special spark, while disaster after disaster slammed down. Famine hit like a hammer, and neighboring states swept in to invade, until the people started turning their backs on that young lord and calling him a failure. The hero had no choice. He threw away his life, his wealth, and everything he owned to save the people. Even on his deathbed, he clung to one burning hope, that life would finally turn kinder for all of them. Then the arson signal blared, and the boy shut his eyes, forcing himself to believe he'd soon be reunited with his family. A crystal-clear voice tore through the crowd, and the young man instantly knew it was Anne. Relief hit him hard, because she'd actually slipped out of the estate during the attack. Just as she tried to get closer to the culprit, they slammed her path to a halt, sticking sticks right in front of her face. Anne crumpled to her knees, helpless as the outrage crashed through her, and the Lord made it clear he didn't want her near, because it was too dangerous for her to be close. Still, his face flickered with gratitude for her support and for doing her job so well as the family's servant. Still, the former maid refused to quit. She stepped up and announced to everyone that she held the real truth. Solis never stopped thinking about his people, and she didn't care one bit about the rumors swirling around them. Her hands stayed clasped in prayer, and she knelt right there in the middle of the street as people around her started to question what they were seeing. Then boom, other girls stepped in, copying Anne and squeezing their hands together in prayer, because they all knew the Lord had carried them too, even so far as guiding him straight into bed. And during the plague, that boy had thrown himself into helping the sick, fearless of infection, and when disaster finally hit for the first time, he stood right there with them, shoulder to shoulder. Everyone felt it deep in their bones. Even with everything falling apart, Missouri, Rosa, and Klee kept their prayers locked on Tequila. A grin lit up his face. Somehow, even in that brutal situation, he couldn't stop smiling. All those gorgeous girls had just started noticing him, and it felt like the Lord had never been this popular in his life. The moment the boy opened his eyes, the whole city erupted in prayer for him. A white ring of blinding light snapped around him, and Solis swore it had to be a hallucination he'd cooked up from all that smoke. The Lord thanked them, bowed in apology for his rudeness one more time, and right behind him, a bell started ringing. A mysterious voice suddenly cut in from the dark, telling the hero he'd finally met the requirements, and that he'd unlocked the power of space and time, plus territorial assessment skills. The young man didn't celebrate. He seethed, because it was already too late. At that moment, nothing made sense. Fire was already blazing, and the heat kept climbing. Rulers got skills to bless their lands, and those abilities decided whether a lord thrived or fell apart. And for Solis, it started to feel like the whole thing was some sick joke. He screamed that his talents weren't needed anymore, and that his life was meant to end right there, in that exact moment. At the very last second, the hero got hit with a second reincarnation, Baron Solis again, and in 1493 his second son was born. The kid blinked, clueless about where he'd landed, tried to move, and his body wouldn't listen, his voice all wrong. And bam, he stared down at his own palm. The moment he saw it, because it was his own hand, reality hit him like a punch. He'd become a child. If he read the truth right, then when death finally hit, he yanked himself into the past with ruthless space-time magic. Then after reincarnation, everything about him got sealed into a book called Asterisk: The History of Baron Soli's Asterisk. And now the hero woke up again inside the body of the freshly born Baron, because right before his old life ended, his soul was yanked into the infant and the previous vessel simply vanished. He'd already tried bloodline magic and failed, but after he gave his consent, the mind-bending transfer of information across space and time kicked off. He even admitted reincarnation might be real, thanks to bloodline magic. Suddenly it hit him, everything made sense at last, and it all came true because people refused to stop praying, and now he finally got to meet every person who'd been there for his parents. The baby burst into tears, so he blurted out excuses, insisting he was only a child, but the moment he imagined the faces of everyone who mattered to him, emotions crashed over him like a thunderstorm. The moment she heard the child's cry, she scooped the baby into her arms and fought to calm Tiakil down. At 16, the hero watched his mother, only 35, die from the plague, and it nearly broke him. Then at 19, he met her again and she stared at him and guessed the truth. Her son was hungry, so it was time to eat. The boy wasn't buying her plan, even if it made him look like a kid, because he had an old man's mind that saw everything coming, so the hero didn't hesitate and flat-out refused. The woman's stomach dropped when her guess hit dead wrong, and her son just couldn't explain what was really going on, his screams tearing through the entire estate. But the hero couldn't rein in his childish instincts, and guilt crashed down on him. Then it hit him. He remembered calling himself an old man. That felt unreal to him because the Lord's execution happened when he was just 20, nowhere near old age. He started losing the thread of what was happening, and then, bam, scraps of his life began flashing back in his mind. At last, the young man finally figured out what was going on. When the hero finally grabbed hold of Takahiro's memories, Nishida, hope flared in his chest. Then everything shattered because the ending was pure tragedy. The kid's eyes overflowed with tears, and he realized those weren't just memories, they were pieces of his own life from before he became Takhul. He couldn't remember what happened to his wife after that, but once he was gone, she had nobody left at all. She heard her child bawling, burst into a warm laugh, and gently scooped him up, like magic, so the crying would finally fade. Then his father stepped in too, brushed a tender hand through his son's hair, sure that Takiel's tears could have wrecked his beautiful face. Dalek, the oldest son, rushed to his younger brother and started pinching his cheeks, and his father scrambled to talk him out of it. The boy grinned at Tequila and said, "I'm here too." His family looked like pure sunshine, joyful kids, loving parents, until heartbreak came for them all. The hero's heart started to race. What if he had to relive the same nightmare of losing everything that mattered? He refused to let that horror come true, and he was ready to do whatever it took to stop it. The kid already had 2 weapons and the know-how of 2 past lives, so there was only one move left. Tequila has to rewrite history. He was dead sure he'd pull it off, because once he found a way to get even stronger, he'd rewrite history again, this time for real. The hero also dared to chase the future, determined to meet Yuko again. Just like Nishida Takahiro, he vowed to carve out a brand new future for his wife. While their baby could barely do anything, he had all the time in the world to plot the next move, and Solace's resolve didn't waver. In 1996, when he turned 3, he was already locked in on books, glued to every page, so his mom just couldn't believe how wild his love for reading was, and she ached to wrap him up in a big hug and cuddle that brilliant little genius. Then the woman stormed out, swore she had a mountain of work to handle, and told the child to behave. Even in his tiny young body, Tequila could already read books. Then everything shifted, and his new view of the world let him see reality in a completely different light. Back when he was born, his world had barely crawled past the medieval era, just like Europe. His family called Astoria home, where his father, Baron Solis, ruled the lands the hero lived in, stretched out across a rough borderland packed with a ton of other untouched countries. Their estate didn't scream royal luxury, but it was huge, straight out of a fantasy book. And magic was real here too, respected just as much as the tools aristocrats and mages carried. Where the hero lived, 2 levers ruled everything: lineage, magic, and pure authority. Power didn't come from titles, it rose from loyalty alone, and the people plus their lands got showered with blessings for every ounce of devotion. Bloodline magic is tied straight to power, locked in one prestigious family and handed down, generation after generation. Tequila's reincarnation happened because of that kind of magic, and Baron Solis' story, passed down through the power of authority, felt like a blessing in ink. The young man couldn't stop smiling as he sank into learning about the world right from a book. He chose to lay out the 5 biggest disasters he could piece together from his memories, and these were the exact crises that had to be solved. In Kyle's era, 503 hit like a nightmare. The Olag River burst its banks and drowned Gagura, wiping out most of the fields. Then in 506, the hero's brother got killed fighting the Empire and the barony's army kept bleeding. In 509, plague tore through, killing the boy's parents and taking 20% of the people. By 512, famine struck again and grabbed another 20%. Finally, in 513, the barony of Solis fell to the Empire, and Tackle was executed right after. All of this hit the young man like an impossible mountain to climb. He clutched his head and screamed because he couldn't wrap his mind around how he was supposed to stop those events from happening again. The maids practically buzzed with excitement and told the lady how adorable the boy looked in that cute pose they found him in. Tequila even dozed off with his head cradled in his hands, and the maids and his mother were over the moon about it. He knew a whole mountain of trouble was coming. First, he had to outrun a raging flood, then chase down intel on the world's situation, and finally gear up for the Griffonian invasion, all while keeping General Weiss in mind, because that invincible commander had led the army, and the young man was still terrified of him. 5 years remained before the first disaster slammed down, and the young man had to figure out how to survive it, forcing himself to believe he was strong enough. At first the boy believed it, but 2 more years tore by and he turned 5, yet the hero still couldn't crack the answer. Tequila tried to rein himself in, forcing his breathing to slow, because screaming would change nothing. The year 498 was here. From the hero's own memories, next year was supposed to bring a huge harvest, then prices would drop and his family's income would tumble right after. And once the harvest shrank again, there'd be no help from neighboring feudal lords either, and yeah, that road never ends well. If we stack up all the disasters waiting in the years ahead, income crashing after that rich harvest, neighboring lands exploding into trouble because a volcano erupts in 500, tensions swelling in 501, and then Tackle's eldest brother dies from the fallout, then every single tragedy keeps piling on until the hero barely has any time left at all. The young man stared into the silence, grinding through every last option, because the moment his resources ran dry, his plan would collapse and he'd be left with nothing. But he still had to tackle the chaos step by step, wiping out the smaller disasters too, because more and more new problems kept piling onto the old ones. But since the hero was just a kid back then, he couldn't possibly know the full details. Good thing, because a book with the answers was waiting for him. Tequila decided to start with what he could manage, slipped a peek into his mom's office, and when he saw she was working, he blurted out a quick apology for bothering her. His mother was grinding at work so hard that, yeah, people swore even seasoned pros couldn't match her, and the moment her son saw it, he couldn't stop squirming with his hands because he had one burning request. She practically burst into relief that he finally reached out, then she leaned in and demanded to know what was wrong. The hero wasn't sure she could help until he heard their artisans were insanely skilled. As he spilled his doubts to her, the mother's heart melted at her child's sweet little smile. With everything going wrong, the hero had no choice but to stare straight at the workshops. His mother smiled and took care of everything for him. Then, after a while, she let him head to the city under strict conditions, and to her son it felt like a lesson he had to earn, because deep down he wanted to learn what an aristocrat's duties really were. Next, he made it clear Maid-Anne had to ride with him. The city street was packed with people, and the boy spun around, staring in shock at just how many there were. Est was the biggest city in the barony of Solis, sitting right on the Kingdom of Kyle's southern border, and it was ringed with towering walls built around a huge central square. Right in the middle of it all stood the Tequila family mansion. Mines, farming, and trade powered everything. Roads kept leading straight to Est, where crowds poured in nonstop and the city practically buzzed with life. The boy beamed at the mouth-watering food sitting behind the display case, and Anne called out to the gentleman, like she wanted him to try it too. Then Taschel spotted the crowd reeling from his praise. Turns out the young man had accidentally sparked all this chaos, even though all he wanted was to eat. The young lord and his maid bowed through their apologies, then bolted out of the shop, right as a full crowd surged into the tavern, yanked there by the baron's praise. Tequila and Anne simply kept walking, calm as ever, down the street. She was the head maid's daughter in the Solis household, raised under strict rules since day one, drilled by her own father, a captain in their army, and blessed with raw sword skill so deadly that not even the most battle-hardened soldiers could stand against her. She's drop-dead gorgeous and somehow the strongest bodyguard in the room, yet she's only 15, just barely stepping into service. Just before he died, the hero caught one final glimpse of her. Long ago, Anne served his older brother Dalek as his personal bodyguard. Fencing masters loved them, and the two trained side by side inside the palace again and again. After her brother's death, the maid clung to Tackle's sister like family, and 3 years later, just as hope flickered, the girl was taken by illness. At 30, the maid had to step in for her mother, who was wiped out by the plague, and take over as head maid. After losing 2 masters, the girl crumpled into deep depression. Suddenly, the hero clocked that the story had shifted, and he felt it in the way his whole attitude changed. He asked the boy what was wrong, but the moment the question hit, he startled her, waved it off fast, and urged them to move on. That maid was stunning, steel-cold eyes, blazing red hair, and yet the hero couldn't stand her. Whenever he tried to play noble, she'd clap him up with this ugly, sour look that made his skin crawl, and she kept pushing him, reminding him that his parents were proud of his skills because a real aristocrat had to carry himself with dignity in front of everyone. The boy went and called her the Ice Lady, even though he was the one who'd been acting like an aristocrat all along. The young man trusted Anne, but fear still nipped at him, especially since his parents sent them together to ease everyone's worries. Still, in the workshop, he had to stay on edge and be extra careful. When they finally rolled up to the workshop, Chief Gred snapped with displeasure. He was convinced this visit didn't belong in the hands of aristocrats. His massive bulk towered over the boy, and to Gred, the kid looked almost swallowed by his sheer size. The hero introduced himself and begged to see how the workshop ran, but the master snapped. Uninvited guests were getting on his nerves, and then his cold reaction hit the room so hard that her smile slipped. Grad instantly changed course and let them have everything they wanted, while Tequila sized up his companion and realized he could intimidate people with nothing but a single glance. They pushed into the workshop and the place was buzzing, everyone hammered away at their craft. The boy strode up and greeted the workers, while over everything they heard the foreman's harsh, barking voice chewing out a blacksmith for sloppy work. The girl's skin prickled with unease in this place, but the moment he breathed in the atmosphere, it slammed him with memories he'd been trying to forget. That workshop hit him like a memory from a past life, some old company all over again, yet he couldn't stand the place. Gred shot a sideways glance at the visitors, baffled. What kind of aristocrat shows up to this chaos without a shred of fear? After a bit, Lord Solis showed up again, and the master's eyes widened. Then he swallowed his objections as Anne stared him down like a threat. The hero got it instantly. They weren't checking in, they were counting on him to break after that first expedition. He shot the maid a look, even though everyone called her the Ice Lady for a reason, because she always stood guard over Tack Hill. The workshop felt dead silent, like no one could even breathe, yet the young man wouldn't quit. He marched up to one of the workers and demanded to know which wood was the strongest, and even when the man waved him off, saying he was busy, it only fueled Tackle's fire as he vowed to wait right there until that worker finally had time. He started grilling everyone about where the next delivery was headed. Red kept watching his act slide into ugliness, frown after frown piling up, until he couldn't take it anymore and snapped to the aristocrat. The man leaned in and asked Solis if he'd ever tried woodworking, so the hero didn't dodge the question and told the truth. Tachel confessed he wasn't fully hooked on the craft, but deep down there was one thing he desperately wanted to do, because he hoped it would finally help people understand the real him. Brad leaned in and asked, "Does it have to be made of wood?" The boy nodded with full confidence. The man glanced at him for a split second, then spun on his heel and marched back. Anne stared at the scene in stunned silence, and from that moment on, the Lord, still with his maid in tow, kept marching into the workshop. That talk opened doors and gave the kid more chances to team up with his boss, so with Gred he finally stood taller, waving at their first meeting and swearing he'd stay out of his way, and Gred met him with a grin too, until the two of them totally clicked. His bond with the other artisans finally took off, no more confusion, they laid everything out crystal clear, then the hero snapped into action, ready to show them what he'd been wanting to do for ages. Greg snatched the paper Tuck Hill shoved into his hands, stared at it hard and demanded, "What is this?" He wasn't sure what the piece was even supposed to look like, so he pushed for a sturdier wood, something that would actually last, and he grilled the craftsman, asking if he had that kind of wood since he barely knew anything about it. The man stopped, thought hard, then rang out for Capel, because he wanted the Lord to speak with him right away, and even if the master was young, his power already screamed with serious potential. The guy shot out his hand toward Solace, flashing a grin as he pitched the dream of a killer collaboration. The boy marched up to his parents and announced he was heading out on a journey, and his mom and dad shoved him forward with good luck. The moment he disappeared, his father's nerves snapped tight because the hero had been slipping into that workshop again and again. Meanwhile, his mother shrugged and said, if he wants this, let him have it, even as she'd been getting less of her son these days. Tequila had been hosting those craftsmen for 3 whole months now. So much time had passed since his first arrival, and right alongside Capel, they finally cranked out a model way bigger than a kid's toy, testing and comparing every option they could. A few days later, the hero couldn't hold it in anymore. He marched out to show his creation to everyone, and before the crowd, he bowed to his parents, thanking them for raising him and backing his dreams. And he spotted someone else standing right beside them. The young man stared at the stranger, confused but hooked, and the stranger instantly got the message, bowing low. He said he'd love to see the project too. Tequila, Smother's personal servant, carried himself like a man of real power in their household, ranking just under the estate's owners, and while he was only in his 20s, he already had a stack of serious accomplishments. He'd served Smother even before she married into the Solis family, and once he joined the household for good, he showed off top-tier skills. And now this guy just had asterisk to see what the hero's work produced, which sounded awesome, until it crushed the kid with pressure and you could still feel his past life hanging over it because back then he'd actually hated the servant. Back when his parents were still alive, the young lord begged for feedback on a few proposals, so Raymond tore them apart in careful detail, then called out every flaw, and that honesty crushed the lord's pride. The mom's personal servant was a tall, handsome, ridiculously talented heartbreaker. Girls swooned, and even the maids couldn't stop staring, while Dactyl stood there with none of that fame and none of that charm. He finally realized the mess was his fault, and the blame landed right on his shoulders, though hey, he did manage to pull in a couple of girls. The hero locked eyes with him, an adult in body, a servant at heart, and realized that even with that little flicker of fear, he could be trusted. The young man's involvement was a surprise, but it was exactly the kind of opening they needed. The boy didn't hesitate for a second. He blurted, "Let's start," and asked Anne to peel back the covering cloth, revealing a huge mechanism. The hero's hope was that Raymond could become the key instrument to rewrite history. But the young man had no choice. He had to be on his side. Tequila first came off like a tiny terror. Raymond couldn't shake the feeling the kid was scared of him. The boy kept staring at Raymond like something was lurking in the shadows, and even his words tripped out, shaky and unsure. Somehow, the hero always managed to recruit allies, then swept in and handled the merchants and artisans at the estate with pure skill. The boy's curiosity lit up, and he ordered Anne, who was meant to serve Baron Dalek's eldest son, to become Tequil's personal servant and report everything about the young master, and the payoff left Raymond utterly stunned. So he sketched a brand new invention that nobody had ever seen, and it wasn't some cheap toy. This crazy mechanism could come in clutch and save the estate's lands for good, before the future ever falls apart. The boy's dad couldn't figure out what kind of giant this was, but his mom lit up with pure delight. She quizzed her son what was going on, and he lit up as he explained exactly how the water wheel was built, then told her to zero in on one crucial detail. The wheel started to spin, then slipped under the water, gulping it up as it sank, its weight suddenly shifting to kick off the whole motion. The wheel roared as it lifted the water higher and higher, until gravity snatched it back down. The liquid got distilled, and its heavy pull kept the whole mechanism whirring nonstop, while the connected gears kept rotating right along with it. His mom lit up over his invention, calling him a genius, while Dalek, her oldest, handled fencing like it was nothing, and little Krisha was a killer at playing, though their father scoffed, saying she was only playing because she was still a kid. Cahill didn't even blink at the praise, because parents always crown their children geniuses, but the servant was the only one who just didn't get it. With that wheel in hand, the hero laid it out plain. It could swing the river's water level up or down, and push water straight to wherever it was needed. And this mechanism can step in where people usually slog through manual labor, taking over the work in certain areas. The man demanded, "How is that even useful?" And the boy answered, "With gears like these, you can grind grain into flour," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Mr. and Mrs. Solis immediately clocked it. This wasn't just any kid's toy at all. The push to automate production was tied to how Byrania's economy stood, because all their grain was locked in one single place, and if anything hit that spot, the whole territory would spiral into disaster. Raymond felt like Takwil already knew all of it, so he couldn't help blurting out where the kid even learned such things, only to hear the hero explain that the book was describing a device used in one of those countries. Seeing how thoughtful he was, the boy figured, if we can get our hands on the water wheel in our territory, it'll kickstart everything and push our development forward. The more the man watched, the more it hit him. This young lord had likely faced some brutal fate, and now he was desperately trying not to repeat it. And yeah, his invention wasn't driven by childish curiosity one bit. Wayman even dared to wonder if the hero had a magical gift that let him see the future, and Tiakhil carried a crushing burden no one else could ever see. Back then, he was just a kid with limited powers, and adults never took him seriously, so the servant stepped up and took it on himself to back the boy. The young man snapped his attention to the young master, and at that exact second, the hero's stomach tightened with tension. But surprise hit hard when the servant gave the water wheel a green light and moved straight into using it, no slowing down, while his parents backed their son too. Now they had a mountain of work to start. The hero's cheeks burned as she thanked Raymond, then watched him walk away, and a bright smile spread across her face. With a personal servant backing him up, production kicked off at once. Then the workshop got hit with an order to mass-produce water wheels, and everyone scrambled to have it all ready in just a few months. Tequila's mom and Reynard were hustling to get the area ready for the install, while her father practically pounced on the chance to rake in cash by cranking out flour. The very first arrow that could rewrite the future was loosed, and the hero vowed to beat all 5 disasters, one step at a time. Some time ago, back when the big harvest was still far off, our hero perched at a table piled high with all kinds of dishes, and yeah, he definitely couldn't goof around with food like that. The water wheels rolled in smoothly, and soon new farmland rose, followed by water mills sprouting up left and right, yet the hero still had one last mission waiting for him. When the harvest is overflowing and wheat prices crash, the Baron has to stock up, basically setting up his next move, because this is the perfect chance to grab wheat cheap now, then sell it high later and get ready for whatever comes next. They demanded a real, solid reason, so they had to forge a whole new product from scratch. The only wheat food that could survive the long haul was noodles, and the hero wasted no time. He chose to make them. He leaned into the Soli's kitchen, clocked the head chef, Miguel, and gave a quick greeting, but Miguel's stern face said it all. He wasn't happy to see the kid back again. Miguel was Father Tequil's comrade, and even in wartime chaos, he still cooked mouth-watering meals with whatever scraps he had. When the war finally ended, he jumped at Baron Soli's offer and took the chef job. He was tight with the boy's father, so he loosened up and talked freely. This time he grilled the young man about his work, and the hero pointed out the ingredients, saying he wanted to whip up a meal that would last for a long, long time. The cook stared and spotted a bizarre mix of flour, water, and salt, and the hero grinned as he promised, "From now on, we're stocked with flour." The man stared at the noodles in silence, while the young man whispered to himself that if his plan played out, those noodles would be ready for the battlefield. Miguel is a pro cook who makes battle-ready food, and with his help, their odds of winning shot way up. He realized he couldn't change a thing alone. If he wanted to reshape the future, he'd need his comrades and the real pros at his side. From that moment on, Tequila and Miguel threw themselves into non-stop trial and error, tasting and tweaking recipe after recipe. The boy even swore to his parents that not a single ingredient would go to waste, so every failed experiment got remade into breakfast, lunch, and dinner. After a brutal stretch of suffering, everything finally clicked into place. Those boys made it just in time for the big harvest, and the hero shot the cook a look full of real, grateful relief. The older brother and younger sister begged to try it too, so the hero fretted that maybe it needed better seasoning, only to remember this world had 0 MI and no soy sauce, and with the kingdom cut off from the coast, seafood might as well have been a myth. He scrambled to find what else he could add, and just like that, the perfect answer popped into his head. He got the brilliant idea to toss noodles into that container, and boom, instant noodles were born in a whole new world. Right on cue, Baronia was packed with bamboo just thriving on its land, while monsters crowded south of Astoria, kept apart by a giant bamboo forest that stretched like a living wall. If left alone, this plant would take over in a blink, so people nearby kept chopping bamboo almost every day just to hold it back, and with demand low, bamboo stayed cheap. First, they hacked a tiny hole in bamboo and stuffed it with noodles, and when a long stick of flour got shoved into a half-empty box with a thump, the whole thing cracked the hero up. Miguel and he picked the perfect seasonings, and then all that was left was to pour in the water and crank up the heat. It all ended with a steaming bowl of noodle soup, so delicious it practically punched your nose with its amazing aroma. Then the big question hit: how the heck do you even pull noodles out of a jar? but Miguel stepped in, saved the day again, and the instant noodles project finally got finished. Tequila was riding a wave of pride. This haul could be sold if famine or war ever hit, and he was sure his father would love it too. Then, out of nowhere, a strange sound snapped his attention. The container was totally wrecked, bamboo steamed out with moisture, and even the dried bamboo was still off limits because using it could spark a fire. He swore there had to be foam, but it never showed up. Rage kept burning in him for months until a massive harvest finally rolled in, and that was the spark that kicked off the 5 plagues. In the 499th year of the Kyle era, the Solis barony finally got its first terrifying hint that the end was creeping in. Right after a lavish harvest, the wind turned cruel and dragged in black volcanic ash from nearby lands, and suddenly everyone panicked, whispering that it could be a sign of doom. Tequila was just 6, a serious-faced kid who stayed close to the villagers, soaking up every worry, and he only got there because Craphonia erupted in a volcanic blast. That book on the Baron's past never warned him about the dangers of ashes, and just as dread started to creep in, a maid cut through his spiral, tapping in, "It's time for the meeting." So the hero grabbed the ashes anyway, planning to win approval for his proposal with them, because for his next arrow, the one that would reshape everything, he needed that sharp, looming feeling that danger was about to strike. This year's harvest was set to explode with abundance, until fate flipped the script and promised next year would be the exact opposite. The barony of Solace had to weather the very first disaster at any cost. If it fell in that opening stage, every later catastrophe would pile on until nothing was left. The family ramped up flour and noodle production, but it still wasn't even close, and they couldn't keep begging for help from neighboring lands or territories. In just a few years, the barony of Solis surged to real power, yet even with all that growth, the likes of Viscounty Harem and Viscount Gomen refused to accept him. The only safe place for the Tequila estate was the barony of Cornell, but they were already drowning in their own troubles, so help wasn't coming. And when the war with Graphonia finally kicks off, Solis has to shoulder the crushing burden of that awful harvest on their own. The boy's whole family packed into the meeting room inside their estate, all waiting in the same breathless space. The hero couldn't shake his fear. This wasn't like the water wheel performance at all, because now a 6-year-old kid would be deciding the fate of the entire territory. Solis' lands were forged by Tackle's parents, because when his father finally got the deed, it was nothing but scattered little towns and dusty villages, and a huge chunk of the land was still untouched and wild. My mom was an earth mage, slicing through the ground like a pro to judge what it could do, while my dad mastered spatial storage, stuffing mountains of stuff into a pocket in space, and that's exactly how Astoria grew big enough to clash with its neighbors. The ruler of those lands didn't just rule, he personally traded like a merchant, and the other aristocrats mocked him into the title Merchant Baron, and he actually loved it. The hero looked at his parents with pure admiration. Look at what they pulled off in just 1 generation. Still, fear not at him. Would they actually say yes to his proposal? Tequila turned to his father and cheered him on because he'd heard the harvest was going to be amazing, and the whole town was grinning from ear to ear. He gripped his head in tight tension, already fearing the worst. If the harvest came too heavy, the stump trouble would only explode worse, and you could bet taxes would rise too, since in this world they counted how much land you owned, letting farmers with a great yield pocket more than usual. Farmers handed over taxes in crops, grabbed a bit to plant seed, and shoved the rest straight to the market. Then the bigger the harvest, the cheaper everything sold, and their wallets took the hit. The hero straight up warned everyone there that huge harvest came with a catch, so he laid out 3 smart options that would dodge every last problem. That bountiful harvest was the perfect moment to put those 3 plans into action, so they'd be ready for whatever threats came next, and the father was on edge, buzzing with worry over his son's new idea. They told the boy to say it all again, but using simpler words like they were forcing his thoughts to fit. They started with food because if wheat prices dipped, it would be the perfect chance to make non-perishables, sell them when prices jumped again, and even showed a bamboo container of instant noodles in development that they could crack open on the battlefield. They even paid the farmers, men who barely scraped by, to churn out noodles, and when the hero said the start was promising, they leaned in and listened like every word mattered. The second plan was simple: raise a barn if the harvest tanks. Solis would still buy the farm produce at the usual price like before the drop, so less would hit the market, prices wouldn't spiral as badly, and the farmers could finally breathe and earn a little money. Raymond's eyes lit up. Farmers would get the same payout, and if the harvest turned bad, they'd get that money back too. The man promised that would make the people stand taller for the Baron, deepening their loyalty, and the hero lit up at the servant's support, because right after that, the final piece was finally coming. Gil's third point wasn't small, it was the most important. When Ash showed up, it screamed that a massive eruption could be about to hit, and Gil had read that warning in books. His father quickly caught on one massive eruption could wreck the harvest too, so the hero decided to buy grain at rock-bottom prices and treat it like the perfect chance to brace for a looming food shortage. The young man bravely blurted out his fears about future food shortages, but he couldn't bring himself to admit he already knew the whole truth for certain. Even if the harvest didn't crash, Tequila figured it was worth one gamble, his only shot to persuade the others. The boy wouldn't take no for an answer, he demanded they trust him. Out of nowhere, the woman snuck up behind her son, wrapped her arms around him, and showered him with praise. She thanked him for thinking it through, then told him to hand everything over to the adults from now on. Her father made it crystal clear, from now on the plan would flip, so he shut the meeting down on the spot. The hero burst with joy at last, because for once he didn't lose to himself like he always had before. In his past life, all he could do was run until it was already too late. He always felt smaller than his brother and parents, or maybe he was just scared to push himself to the limit. Now he finally understood he should have done this way sooner, but it was too late. The family was gone, and the boy fully believed he'd never see them again while this whole disaster crushed Takahiro Nishida too. He lived like any other office guy, no kids, just one wholehearted devotion to his wife. Ever since school, where bullies crushed his confidence, he grew up unable to meet anyone's eyes, so Nishita never found the words to truly speak up. And when he finally did have ideas, his coworkers kept snatching them like they were theirs, until the day he shut himself away, staying home, disappearing into books. His wife Yuko, married to the hero for 20 years, threw herself into her job and watched their income get crushed, yet she refused to give up on him, so she shouldered the burden of earning for the both of them, until one day she collapsed from sheer overwork and stress. In that instant, the hero's self-hatred crashed over him, and he finally saw the trap he'd forced on his wife. When Nishida finally clawed her way out of that coma, she grabbed any job that came her way, then their money steadied and Yuko's face lit up with a bright smile. But after that, he just kept pushing himself until he collapsed from exhaustion, and soon he died, leaving his wife all alone. Nishina and Tackle kept moving down the same path, but when the hero lunged forward, he abruptly scrambled back until he crashed at the edge of a cliff with no way through. But now he's got the chance to forge that lost future, one step, one breath at a time, until the hero can rewrite what was supposed to happen. In the fall of 1999, the harvest season was about to burst wide open. And now harvest season hits, and the wheat here takes way longer to ripen than it did back in the hero's world. Sure, the farmers thought, great, this means more food, but that feast of grain crashed the market prices instead. So Mrs. Mother and Raymond took the first step, slammed out a decree to build a barn to calm the farmers, and once that order went out, since the buildings were already in motion, the parents figured this was exactly what they'd been thinking all along, so they didn't hesitate and backed him right away. The moment grain prices plunged hard. The woman and her servant struck first, snagging grain at the old market price while the wild growing ears around town fed the noodle mills, and with the Solis family coughing up small wages, they churned it out in bulk without slowing down. Meanwhile, his father just stood there watching until it hit him, money. Then his eyes snapped open, gleaming with pure excitement like he was floating on air because the moment for his spatial magic demonstration was finally here. Baron Solis tried to snag cheap wheat from nearby territories while hiding his name. Tequil knew exactly what he was up to, and sure enough, he later turned that wheat into noodles. The hero's father strutted in with a rock-solid plan and even promised his son 10% of the profits, so the young man snapped it up, thrilled and genuinely grateful. He was so over the moon he replayed the scene from his favorite novel, then ran his finger along the man's lip and winked like he was daring the world to blink first. The father's jaw dropped in total shock at what he just witnessed. That's exactly the kind of stunt blue-haired maids were trained for. Once the boy pulled his prank, he bolted. The Baron practically beamed at the new price swings in the nearby territories, while the guy acted like he'd been dropped into a different reality, grinning all the time. Maybe this is what a lord was meant to be, and the hero didn't doubt it for a second. Solis pushed all of this for the prosperity of his lands, so we were constantly getting sent outside the city, and for the boy, it honestly sounded like an adventure. This was the exact moment he'd been waiting for. The third arrow was about to fly. The hero begged his parents to let him watch the barn rise, but they shut him down. "Not for the Lord's son," they said, and then reminded him he was only 6 years old. But the boy wouldn't back down. He begged and insisted with everything he had because he was desperate to go, while his mother and father just couldn't figure out why he needed it so badly. He then reminded them that he'd been the one who pushed for the barns in the first place, and he had no clue how the people really felt about it. So if he wanted to be a worthy right hand to his brother someday, he needed to hear their voices firsthand. Father let out a heavy sigh, still baffled by that wild rush of zeal, like the farmers might have thought their lord was scheming to cash in on them. Tequila demanded to see the barn construction with his own eyes. It felt like the perfect excuse to him, an adult voice totally disguised. Mom paused for a beat, then asked her son if that was the real reason, and it completely stunned him. For the hero, that was all the proof he needed. Then he saw it, a wounded smile curling on the woman's lips like she was desperate for him to say one specific thing. Tequila blurted out that he was done staying cooped up and he wanted to see the world outside, especially to stare at Historia, because it just wasn't fair for him to stay trapped at home all the time. Then he snapped himself back too late because the whole secret had already spilled out of his mouth, no matter that he was 70 at heart. A chuckle answered him, and somehow his parents didn't see a mistake, they saw the real truth. His mother only let him leave town with Raymond, safety first, always, and when his father heard it, rage exploded across his face. Tequila underestimated her, then reality hit, and she turned out to know everything. The man tried to warn Chris that this move was a bad idea, but Chris snapped at him, telling him he could only get away with it because he kept traveling with the Dalek. Turns out her husband just couldn't get why his younger brother wanted to copy his older one. Then out of nowhere, she realized he might actually be ready to shoot down her decision, and fear twisted her face into something terrifying. The father caved on the spot, snapped orders to his son to stay out of Raymond's way, and keep himself out of the construction site entirely. The hero struck a deal, finally settling everything once and for all. The mother clung to her son and squeezed him tight because in Astoria's own backyard bandits and monsters lurked everywhere, and moving even a step could get you killed. If anyone caught wind that the Baron's son had slipped out, chaos could erupt, so they beefed up security, and the boy couldn't help feeling crushed by the trouble he caused. He got permission to hit 3 villages and 1 nearby town near Est, and even though he'd still hate being stuck in the city, he couldn't help but feel grateful to finally get out. Raymond guided him step by step, and the whole trip sailed like a dream. They even stopped in a riverside village, and this young man completely lost it, then started showing the villagers how to build a proper barn. Afterward, the boy panicked that the servant would run back and spill everything to his parents. But Anne and Raymond swore to stay tight-lipped, and Takwil caught them winking at him like they were in on a secret. Even the hero begged the man to help him crack the 3rd arrow of the future, spilling every last shred of his knowledge, until the ultimate plan to crush the disaster finally took shape. In the late fall of 1999, this kid came sprinting back to his parents' place, grinning like he'd won the world, clutching a gigantic, magnificent turnip only for his parents to stare in stunned disbelief. The father fired off a sharp question to his wife: when did their son turn into a farmer? Because at this pace, they'd soon be calling him a barren farmer, staring at the yard that used to be empty and was now packed with vegetables. To fix the raging food shortage, the hero sprang into action and started growing turnips, just like folks in this world already did, mostly for livestock. But these turnips were so tasty and wholesome that the 3 kingdoms absolutely adored them, and even a joke spread about a Chinese war commander planting turnips right inside his own camp. Tequila grilled Raymond to uncover how it was grown, and the answer hit hard. The best way was planting it out in open fields. The boy leaned on his mother's influence and begged his father to track down a merchant where he could sell his turnip seeds. Miguel was stuck whipping up recipes with that vegetable, but ever since then, the hero's lunch and dinner kept rolling back out as fresh failures from the cook. The hero gathered every clue, then mapped out a plan to ship the seeds to 10 separate locations, just in case the harvest turned out bad. Then he started experimenting with growing them and lost all control, yanking turnips out of the ground like he was going for broke. Anne hauled him up and with Neil's help wiped the dirt from the young gentleman's face. Then the boy thanked her, even though sometimes Anne could be downright terrifying. Solis braced for the maid's constant scolding, but Anne surprised him. She backed him instead. Tekwil spotted his brother and practically asked him to team up for crop harvesting, but Dalek shut it down. The young man decided his older brother didn't need any of it, because the Solace family had already done everything they could, and before the poor harvest even began, the boy finally felt ready. In the 500th year of the Kaling era, disaster struck. Graphonia's volcano god erupted with rage, and black ash clouds swallowed the sky over the whole kingdom, choking fields, crushing harvests, and planting starvation in every heart. Then, in the spring in Est, a boy stared out his window into the dark and begged his mother, "When will we see the sun? Will it always be like this?" Right after that, the clouds broke apart and a vivid blue sky burst back into view. The townsfolk burst into cheers the moment the sun returned. Then the sky stayed cruelly dry and rain refused to show up, putting the harvest in real danger of drought. Once again, panic tightened around everyone's hearts, but the barony stood ready. Chris slammed the water wheels into motion, ordering them to pump every last drop they could. Then he kept a sharp eye out, ready to catch any breakdowns the moment they started. And there was no way they could let that river run dry. People had to keep breathing through the disaster. If they hadn't had that water wheel and stocked up with food, the exact same trouble would have struck again. Then the woman snapped at her servant to hunt down every scrap of info about other countries and territories, no matter how small it looked. Chris realized she couldn't hold back. She had to pour every last bit of herself into it. In the conference room, they slapped their notes side by side, and it looked like the plan was actually working, so much that even folks started saying the Baron's family had saved them. But nobody got to breathe easy yet. They still had to watch the money and track every supply. Then the hero leaned in and asked, "So does this mean we're finally facing the real problems?" Akil sensed everything was finally going right, but he still needed someone to say it out loud, so when they won, it was proof. Turnips flourished across the whole region, and everyone clung to that lifeline, grateful they could actually make it through the winter. Sure, the hero hoped it'd be a nice surprise, but the moment his father showed up, unease hit him hard. They clawed their way through a brutal harvest, poverty, and famine, and still managed to scrape together some coin by selling their wares. The Solis even sent aid to nearby territories to keep wars from igniting. But two nightmares still loomed. Down the road, the hero would have to face border conflicts head-on. After the meeting, the boy slipped off to his room. The second he heard about his victory, exhaustion crashed over him because he'd stayed tense for so long that relaxing could have meant exhaustion and even death. Then, out of nowhere, a voice cut through from his father's office. The voice dripped with pure exhaustion like a tired lament, and the boy eavesdropping froze, thinking with a sinking gut that it was all his fault. He stumbled back to his room, baffled at what was happening to him, and when the maids saw his strained pose and tried to comfort him, he snapped that this was bigger than they thought, only for the girls to assume he was just overwhelmed by school. He couldn't stop worrying about how their bond would play out with the Viscounty, especially since Goldman were their neighbors. Back then, grain gone wrong poisoned their relationship, but this time they found peace on their own, no headaches at all, and when food got tight, they even shared turnips with their neighbors. But the ruler of that territory didn't buy it. He was sure the Baron was just cashing in on a rough situation, something no true aristocrat would do, so he flatly rejected the offer of help. The man truly believed it was wrong to meddle with nature and mess with the water's flow, and on top of that, their neighbor over in Viscounty, Karamia, was downright hostile too, because to them, eating cattle feed was beneath them. In the 506th year of the Kyle era, a rookie swordsman of light will get himself cornered by an enemy's ruthless, well-planned trap. He managed to save most of his soldiers, but he couldn't make it back himself, dead. The Solis family's first loss was a Dalek, and it was gone only 5 years short. And Tichai's brother? Beast of a swordsman, so there's no way he fell in some fair duel. Everyone braced for the brutal cold of 501 because that winter would crush every territory, farmers would starve, hunger would spread, and while the cities swelled with people, so did their rage, driving many to flee Astoria. Even before those trials kicked off, Viscount Holmes stayed locked in hostility, and the boy's parents, along with Raymond, couldn't make heads or tails of why. The hero even toyed with the idea of ending his neighbor like an insect. A month later, Tequila started hearing rumors about a massive wave of refugees. Solace's parents were trading worries about how the city was slipping out of order until their son burst in, breathless and frantic, to announce his proposal. After hearing him out, they couldn't shake the idea, and they decided to jump in and try it. Later in Astoria, the streets filled with hungry people, and as the future shifted, fresh nightmares blew in. Viscounty's troubles reminded the hero of what was coming, but he never guessed the face he'd soon see. Captain Weiss, the one he feared most. Solis von Tekel, hero of Astoria in the Kingdom of Kyle, lived there with his family, and this was his third life. First, Japanese office worker Takahiro Nishida locked himself away, wrecked his wife's life with it, and then died from sheer overwork. Next came Tekelejanam, the second son of the Solis family, born into a life packed with brutal hardships they just couldn't break through. Right before he died, the young man unlocked a new power, spatial magic snapped to life, and that kicked off his third life. The kid was set on rewriting the future, saving his family first, then diving back into magic to reshape his own life with Yuko and finally make her smile. In the 501st year of the Kyle era, Tekwil hit 8 years old, grinning as he leaned back in his chair, finally done with his homework. This was his third life, and after all that time, he'd already drilled himself through at least 15 years worth of aristocratic schooling, so yeah, he could knock out tasks the moment morning hit. He yanked on his jacket and sprinted down the stairs. And when he clocked the gentleman was about to vanish, he shot after him. She reached for his jacket, but the guy snapped and refused to let her have it. Out of nowhere, an 11-year-old Dalek lunged onto him and started grilling his brother. "Did you finish your homework yet?" Dalek teased the younger one, bragging that he was good at everything, then grinned and told him, jokingly, to save him something too. The hero stared at him and knew, even if the young man talked big, he wouldn't truly prove himself until he picked up a sword at 13. Then 1 year later, his first battle would roar to life, and by the time he hit 16, Dalek would stake his claim and make every neighbor start fearing him. While in his past life, he'd been so much more useful than the hero, who'd done absolutely nothing. But now the kid understood if his brother took the same road, he'd get himself killed in battle. Tequila wasn't letting that happen. When the older one caught the younger staring, he pressed, "What's wrong?" He dove in with tickles, all because his brother was clearly hiding something from him. Tequila yanked himself loose and bolted down the road, swearing he'd snag Dalek something delicious before he headed home. The hero and his maid rolled into a refugee camp in the city of Est, and the moment the boy took it in, he felt the air turn calmer. Last year, the kingdom's southern lands got slammed by a colossal ash cloud. Graphonia's volcano erupted, choking the sky, and then drought hit hard, wiping out harvest after harvest. Water wheels started churning in the barony of Solis, right alongside non-stop noodle production. Neighboring viscounties crumbled under crop failure, and the refugees had nowhere left to run, so they flooded straight into S. If their numbers ballooned, public order could have shattered, but Astoria couldn't abandon those in need, so the hero loosed a fourth arrow. With Raymond and the others, they carved out a refugee camp beyond the walls, herding everyone who needed help into one guarded place. The hero pitched a quick stop at the administration. The maid nodded immediately, and they tore off together. The heroes were huddled in the camp's admin office when the girl stepped forward and snapped that everyone had to register first, then pointed them to line up. Administrator Claire took over, telling them they'd have to fill out everyone's details. Name, gender, relationship status, and even what their old occupation used to be. The girl hit record on one of the heroes, peppering him with, "Where are you from?" and he shot back that he came from a village east of Astoria. Finally, she slammed the registration complete and got it all locked in. She handed the heroes the exact cards they'd need to snag food and find work, because there was no way they were allowed to lose them. Each card carries its own number, so there's zero swapping them out, and the girl goes, "Thank you," to Claire. She also said you can grab a job off the notice board, because they're actively recruiting right now to help improve the refugee camp. She told them, if you've got questions, slip into the consultation room through the center door. The girl shot her another grateful thank you, and then Claire waved for the next person to come over. She spotted a boy ahead of her and blurted out his name right away, determined to yank his attention toward her. Mr. Tahil told Claire she was absolutely crushing it. She blushed, looked down for a second, and then thanked him with a shy, awkward smile. A refugee clerk in the administration suddenly crumpled at the gentleman's feet, bursting into grateful thanks, thanking him for letting them not just survive here, but work and get paid too, and then admitting, through sheer disbelief, that they had no clue how they could ever repay him. Someone yelled that something was going down, but the gentleman just couldn't make sense of where it was happening. Then they slapped him with the name Young Gentleman Genius, and he still couldn't figure out why they thought he was one. As the refugees bowed to the gentleman, a sudden voice cut through the air and shouted at them. Claire burst out of her booth, snapped at the refugees not to try that again, and barked, "Back to work." They hurriedly apologized. Claire even hauled herself over to the hero and apologized for blabbing that it was his idea, and Teju shot back in his head, he never meant for it to explode like this. He asked her how they were doing and she lit up and said everything was great. Some of the workers were refugees and they'd settled in fast, then jumped right in to help everyone else. She said everyone here owes him a lot. Because of him, they've got good food and real jobs, and she should know. She grew up in an orphanage and seeing people smile like that fills her with pure joy. After all that, she hurriedly apologized, admitting she'd been so distracted from her work that she lost focus. The girl spun away like she was done, ready to bolt. Then Mr. Tahir's voice snapped out and stopped her. He leaned in and thanked her for everything she'd done. She told him it was the easiest thing in the world, no trouble at all. Then the hero shouted that it was time to jump in and help the others. Setting up a refugee camp was the key to surviving the next disaster, and they'd need a ton of supplies, but they couldn't grab everything at once. Even though it was simple, they set it up in a flash. Right then, the gentleman spotted a massive line of people and told them to shuffle to a new spot. He admitted that he'd picked Claire for the job, saying she was absolutely elite at this kind of work. Carl had custom cards made at the very last minute, and the guys on his team only thought it up right then. That was the fourth arrow loosed, and Tahil could feel everything shift again because the one who'd always stood by his side suddenly turned soft with him, just like Raymond. She stopped tearing into him and started treating him with real respect, even if he was clearly younger, and sure, she still loved to hype things up at times, but the Ice Lady wasn't around anymore. She turned into the hero's can't-do-without ally, the one he'd never be able to live without. Everything was sliding perfectly on schedule, until lately they started getting messages from Victorianism Gomen demanding they ship the refugees right back. Refugees have scattered from right at me in Gomen, and the heroes don't care about where they're running from, but now they've gotten a written request and they can't offer Gomen's people jobs, shelter, or food anymore, so it's not as simple as just refugees, not by a long shot. So many people won't say the truth, some even tuck away the fact that they once left Gomen and there's basically no way to check it, so right now they're boxed in with no real choice but to keep working the exact same way. A few days later, they march the refugees to the line and demand they get in. To heal, he barked orders at the crowd, make them say their names and tell where they came from, and don't let anyone slip in who isn't from Astoria. Out of nowhere, someone sneaking up from behind grabbed the gentleman's attention. A cloaked man showed up in front of the gentleman and demanded, "Are you Viscount Gomen's mercenaries? Can you get us some food?" The men behind him stared with pure disdain, and Tahil just froze, caught off guard. The hero weighed his options, then shot back with one burning question. "So you're really the Vi country's former mercenaries? Go on." Rage sparked in his chest as he snapped back that he'd already torn up the contract. He got rid of them because he refused to waste food, and Tahil just shrugged and said, "Then it's not a problem." He figured the mercenaries had it rough. If they checked in at the counter, they'd get fed. The hero said, "All you've got to do is line up and register one by one." The man shot back that he was genuinely grateful for what he'd done. And just like that, he admitted he was now the master's debtor. A couple of hours later, Mr. Tahil was up to his elbows in the dishwater, jumping in to help. The hero snapped his head around and shouted to someone behind him. The man looked Tahil straight in the eye and spilled that the boy was the local lord's son and that the whole camp idea came from him. The hero shot back that it didn't shock him at all, because everyone had been snarling at him from the start for not having the look of an aristocrat. The boy's response absolutely blindsided the man. He dropped to his feet on the spot, blurted out apologies for his earlier rudeness, and then said the whole system blew his mind. It looked incredible to him. Finally, he leaned in and introduced himself, Weiss Schwarzfach. The hero shot back that he was Takwil, Baron Soli's second son, and he was thrilled to finally meet this new refugee. Then, for all 30 mercenaries, he thanked the boy. Weiss chimed in that even though he looked young, he was the leader of the double-headed hawk mercenaries. The boy burst out laughing, telling him to quit acting surprised, because he was the one standing there younger than the mercenary right in front of him. Weiss kept talking, insisting the people they served wouldn't lift a finger for them, didn't even toss them food. The hero froze because it felt like he'd heard his name somewhere before. So they push into their land, tear through it, and hunt down a fresh boss in Graphonia. Tequila's jaw dropped at his own words. Did they really need to hire a brand new employer in Graphonia? The moment he repeated it, color drained from the boy's face in an instant. He yanked the basket of dishes down and screamed at the top of his lungs. Tequila's blood went cold at what the mercenary said. And it hit him finally, where he'd heard that name before. The Griffin Empire's double-headed hawk commander of the Northern Army, Weiss, will be the one who storms Astoria in just 12 years. This was the same man who'd carried out Takid back in the day, so Weiss and his crew hurried to gather up the dishes the hero had knocked over, and Weiss even asked if Takid was exhausted. The boy just smiled and said he was totally fine, then thanked them for jumping in to help. As the bearded man's memory started to slip out of Kill's mind, all the hero could cling to was one detail from that execution, his beard, and then Kill shot one last thanks at the mercenaries. Weiss flat out promised that if they could do anything else for him, they'd be ready to return the favor, and if it came down to it, Takil could call on them anytime. The hero figured it was painfully obvious. He ordered everyone not to head to Graphonia because this was an emergency. So he has to figure out what to do right this second. No hesitation, no time to waste. All alone in that room, Tequila stared into nothing and fought to figure out how to dodge death. The invincible young general of Graphonia, Black Hawk himself, commander of the double-headed Hawk army, slammed into the Empire's southern front, outsmarting everyone with flawless tactics and never once tasting defeat, then backed the third prince so hard he became the missing piece that helped him seize the throne. After the third prince finally takes the throne, he doesn't waste a second. He launches an invasion on the kingdom. A flash of memory hits him hard. The day in 513 of the Kyle era when Tackle was just 20, charging onto the battlefield with his eyes set on the southern front, gripping his duty tight even though they'd be crushed by sheer numbers. At the front, an urgent report snapped through the air. Massive crowds were charging in from the demon lands. More than 5,000 showed up out of nowhere, while 50,000 Imperials were already smashing the front lines. Tequila couldn't figure out where these extra troops even came from, because Weiss quietly carved off part of his force to slip straight to the capital, fooling both the enemy and his own allies. The hero chose to stall them so civilians could get out safely, and General Weiss took his surrender, promising they'd live, yet right after that he was executed, and he never saw that man again. In Viscounty's home, they treated him like trash, so he swore his loyalty to the Graphonian Empire, because if he ever came back to the Empire, he'd become a terrifying threat, especially after what they did to him in Viscancy. They were wiped out and starving, stuck with the impossible job of making it to the Empire anyway, and Talal feared none of them would survive the trip alive. He finally understood why his hatred for Tequila burned so hot. Weiss's team had been treated with pure disdain, and losing so many comrades had shattered him. Right then the boy snapped, everything traced back to Gomen. It's Gomen who keeps the hero from moving, because a real aristocrat won't dirty his hands profiting off the country's poverty. The boy brushed the idea aside without a second thought. The hero decided that if Gomen had treated the mercenaries like humans instead of trash, the country would have fought back and survived. Now it was all on him. He had to figure out a way to stop it, right there by himself. With their country's money, they could snap up mercenaries in a heartbeat, but since they're not at war right now, there's no reason to keep hiring a whole army. Then Tackle snapped into a new plan. He claimed he could be a prophet, warned that a war was about to erupt, and insisted we needed mercenaries, but Vice refused to believe a word of it. And nothing else matters. He has to grab onto something, anything, before he falls. Once the mercenaries finally slipped out of the city, he realized he had only one shot left. With that babyface, he can totally pull the wool over their eyes. Tiki's about to need a whole lot of help from a new friend, because she can't do this on her own. In the middle of a refugee camp, that day lit a spark. He decided he'd keep showing up to the mercenaries, claiming he was just checking out the camp. And stepped in and kept a close watch on the refugees. The boy stood there, eyes locked on them as they drilled, right when it looked like their practice was already wrapping up. After sliding his sword back into its sheath, Vice turned and demanded what the local lord's son was even doing out here. The hero stepped up and greeted Weiss with a bold, confident smile. Tahir talked him into believing his parents were fine with him joining the refugees, but he didn't say a word that he'd been allowed to help at the reception desk, so he pretended he didn't hear anything. Tahir said he could learn a ton just by watching them, and Weiss shot back that he was flattering him way too much. He leapt off the box, grabbed a book, and declared he'd read something inside, then asked the general to explain it because his curiosity was burning hot. Then the hero laid it all out. Kyle's kingdom and the Graphonian Empire were on the brink, and he asked, straight up, if a brand new war could ignite from this tension. Weiss caught it, actually found it funny, and let out a quick, delighted laugh. The mercenaries snapped back that the Empire was already locked in a war with another nation, so a full-scale invasion wasn't happening, at least not for now. But they pushed toward the empire to hunt for work, and Kill swore he'd seen it all before, like his old life was repeating itself, right up until he realized he'd already climbed to the rank of general after wiping out Sula County. Weiss pushed on. If the invasion kicks off, Markograph Team's soldiers on the Hasselberg will dig in and keep their line. Their men are tough, and the fortifications at Fort Southgate are practically unbreakable. Tequila still pressed, insisting again, "So you're really talking about Fort Southgate, right?" Weiss admitted it would take a whole crowd to smash through that young gate, and with it like this, he definitely wouldn't gamble on attacking the kingdom. Even if the Margraviate gets shattered, powerful lords will slam into them right away, and the Order of Imperial Knights has about 30,000 cavalrymen, the fiercest fighters in the Kingdom of Tequila. Seriously, how many supplies would it take to smash through fortification after fortification? Weiss knew it was way too risky, but the boy lit up anyway, saying the mercenaries' words had finally given him hope. And Tequila hit him with a whole new option. He snatched a stick off the ground and started carving a line right in front of Weiss' feet. He kicked off his explanation. Right here stood the border mountains, and beyond them the southern gate fort waited. He couldn't take his eyes off the gentleman as he watched it with total obsession. Tequila even charted a path toward the capital, but trouble always lurks. Other aristocrats can step in and block the way at any moment. There's a way to dodge the fight with the Margraviate entirely. If we outsmart them and hit from the side, their troops will whip left and split, then we'll slip right through Vi County of Harem. Weiss stared stunned, like he couldn't even trust what he was seeing. Takwell figured out he could hit Astoria and dodge the big-time opponents, then the trip from there to the capital barely took any time. The mercenary stared at the boy's diagram, and shock hit him hard. The hero said, "I didn't overthink it, I just kept thinking about it after I read the book." That's why he's panicking. This place could explode into a full-on battlefield. Weiss didn't blink, his furious glare pinned the boy in place. The hero stewed in his own head that he didn't want the guy to fear him, then Weiss cut in and asked how he even got that idea. He said he figured that was the simplest way to do it. The mercenary started blurting out, "Wait, this plan is actually wild," then immediately admitted, "Yeah, but there are a few serious problems. First, you'd need a huge army. Second, that choice means you're officially leaving demon territory behind. And third, every Imperial soldier knows crossing into demon soil is an absolute taboo. Plus, those roads are wrecked, so the supply route grinds to a crawl. Then we've got to sync up with the main army, but the distance is just too massive." Weiss kept thinking, and then it hit him, so the army would be stuck at a real disadvantage. Monster battles were coming no matter what, and surviving like that would be nearly impossible. In the end, the mercenary decided the risk just wasn't worth it. Then Tequila shot back, dead silent, 12 years from now, I'll pull off the exact same stunt." The boy figured Weiss knew exactly where they were headed and had a killer route. Since the whole army was cavalry, they tore through the demon lands at breakneck speed. The mercenary knows full well how terrifying demons can be, but the Empire's intel kept them one step ahead. And on top of that, the roads had been upgraded to move food easily during harvest season. Because of this, he's locked in, ready to win exactly on his own terms. Tequila feared that if he missed their reunion in his past life, it would seal his fate and get him executed. Then the boy snapped, "Am I worrying for nothing?" and apologized for the whole stupid thought, but Weiss shot back, refusing to let it slide because his idea was genuinely interesting. Then the mercenary leaned in and warned, if the Imperials tried this, they'd better have a base ready, because the Margraviate would reel in, hit from behind, and turn the whole plan into defeat. Egan is the perfect pick. Because it's right near the border, exactly where being there pays off. Weiss also confessed he'd heard rumors about a settlement where people survive by hunting demons. Weiss straight up admitted that this was exactly the route they had planned all along to smash their way to the Empire. Tequila slammed the idea shut and decided these talks were going nowhere. And he swung the problem back to the one strategist he trusted most. The hero swallowed his pride and went straight to the best strategist. The kid showed up, apologizing like he'd wasted everyone's time, only for the boy to grin and say he was actually glad. The boy started telling him he wanted to give his parents something special, but he just couldn't figure out the right way yet. He begged Raymond for help, and the boy didn't even hesitate. Then the gentleman's jaw dropped, shocked the kid agreed that fast. Tequila started spilling what he really wanted to do next. Right then, a maid burst into the room and cut him off mid-sentence. He walked up to him and announced, "Tea's ready." Raymond warned that if you rush your decisions, you're basically daring mistakes to show up. Tequila sprawled on the sofa, sipped his tea, and felt the warm calm sinking in. Raymond just kept his eyes locked on him, like he couldn't look away. The guy snapped that the time had finally come to start talking, and the hero replied, "All right, let me put 2 proposals on the table." He'd start by welcoming every refugee as a full citizen. Yeah, the country's stretched thin trying to take in that many people, but it counts on them, and this would also be a huge shot in the arm for boosting production across the region. He leaned in and asked Raymond what he thought, and the kid said it might help, but admitted he couldn't figure out how Raymond planned to pull it off. They can ship in fresh citizens to start forging Mount Hagen from the ground up. Raymond latched onto the gentleman's idea, completely intrigued. He grilled the boy, demanding to know why he believed Mount Tegun was perfect for the country. Takwil clocked that the boys already had it figured out, but he still told him that most of the refugees had come straight from Gamana and Harem. Because they're trying to hide the refugees from those 2 territories, the boy's mind snaps to Mount Tegun first. It's a perfect stronghold, high and strategic, where they can build defenses now and be ready later if they decide to move in and colonize Demon Land. After hearing him out, Raymond demanded a second offer from the boy. Tequila fired off a question to the strategist, "Have you heard of the 2-headed hawk mercenary?" And the strategist shot back, "Yeah, I have." He told him he'd already talked to him and instantly felt that he was both sharp and genuinely talented. Then the kid added that back in the day they'd patrol and defend their borders nonstop, hauling that work into their military hills day after day. He admitted those mercenaries would be a huge help, and he couldn't shake the feeling they absolutely couldn't be overlooked. The strategist paused, eyes narrowing as the pieces finally clicked into place. The boy kept insisting they could absolutely shell out for them, so they'd finally have bodyguards they could trust. This was a golden chance to beef up the city's defenses, so he fired off a question to the strategist, asking if he agreed that they absolutely couldn't let it slip away. The moment Tequila finished, he turned to Raymond and demanded his opinion. He said that bringing in 30 people would cost a fortune. With a sweet, sly grin, he asked if this was truly all his master wanted, and Dackle felt the strategist had him completely figured out. Then the gentleman snapped that he'd already checked it all, and that Anne had already told him everything. The boy kept going like they can hire mercenaries not just to fight but to handle other jobs too and make money in totally different ways. He also wants Weiss to train him because Tequila trusts him like crazy. This mercenary is an absolute killer tactician and sword master, so he's pushing for Weiss to be his teacher. Raymond wasn't against the gentleman's ideas at all, he just shot back that they had to begin with the simplest first. The strategist pushed for a deal on that first proposal. But it's way too soon to set Weiss up as a teacher. First, they've got to make sure he's someone they can actually trust. By the way, Raymond leaned in and grilled the gentleman on what he planned to do next. Tequila fired back that he'd stand by his brother, no matter what, because he was taking the next heir's seat. He vowed to run the economy in those new lands himself, and he swore Mount Tegun would rise into a brand new fortress, because for his city's future, he refused to hand those territories over to anyone. Raymond caught his meaning instantly and shot back, "Don't worry, leave the rest to me." The very next day in the boardroom, Lord leaned in and said Raymond had already spilled everything, and then he snapped, asking why Tequila couldn't just sit still. Good news, they've got a little extra cash, but it's still a brutal deal because they may not even claw back 10% of what they pour in, and he immediately grills Duckle, "Are you 100% sure?" The lady leaned in and told him they had to trust Achilles every call, then reminded him that, thanks to the Lord, they were sitting pretty right before the disaster hit. The Lord then shot back that he wasn't about to poke the Viscounts again. The lady stared him down and said, dead serious, that politics were the Lord's battle, not something Tekel should ever have to worry about. She pushed harder, saying a Lord must care about ordinary people's lives, and called it a perfect shot to grab valuable resources, while the killer sat there silently, convinced he could still feel bad for his father because his mother was holding the strings on him. The Lord nodded and decided to pass it to Tequila and Raymond. Then the two of them practically burst with joy. But when it's time to rule these new lands, they refuse to move a step, waiting until the boy turns 15, and even the fencing stays on ice for now. The hero was seriously pissed off. His father offers him 50 gold coins as a thank you for his achievements, but he quickly snaps back, regular people can't squeeze out more than 2 coins in years, so that gentlemen better spend every last one smartly. Hackle couldn't believe it. He stared at the sheer pile of 50 gold coins in total shock. The boy stared at that cash and thought, this is way too much for a kid, it's going straight to the next arrow. He's crushed that the fencing didn't work, but he still trusts Raymond to hold things down inside the city, so he's stuck waiting for a while. All of a sudden, a voice burst in, pleading for forgiveness. Tackle whipped around and there stood his brother, Dalek, right beside him. He quickly apologized for barging in on their meeting. The eldest son leaned in and declared he wanted to say something too. The Lord said he didn't know why, but a terrifying bad feeling wouldn't leave him. Suddenly, the Dalek blared that it wanted to learn how to swing a sword. He begged his father to let him and Thackle train swordsmanship under Lord Weiss. The hero couldn't even dream that help would show up from a place he never saw coming. The Lord wasn't buying it. He grilled his eldest son, asking if he truly wanted some mercenary as a teacher, and the Dalek just stood there, grinning with total confidence. Then his father leaned in and demanded to know what on earth had suddenly taken over him. The whole family huddled together, staring wide-eyed as the Lord and the Dalek squared off right in front of them. His father demanded more details, and his son nodded, ready to spill every last bit. Then he leaned in and broke it down 9 brutal ranks of sword skill, from no experience all the way to beginner, swordsman, experienced fighter, fierce swordsman, virtuoso, sword demon, holy sword, and finally the sword fight itself. Most of the soldiers are nobody special, but in our territory, my father and 2 other guys are the top brass, and there's not a single fighter stronger than them. The son kept bragging that their army was feared for its bravery, but the truth was brutal. They had barely any skilled swordsmen, and the father nodded, confirming it. 2 other knighted leaders besides the Lord now run their own settlements, so the Dalek can't train with them. The younger brother couldn't believe it. Somehow, his brother had gotten that information. At that moment, his brother was already training his fencing. Freshly started, sure, but he still clawed his way up to the 3rd rank from the bottom, and his blade work was so sharp it didn't lag far behind the adults. In his past life, he climbed to the rank of Sword Saint, and the kingdom's bigwigs hailed him like a legend. His sword magic was so rare, it barely existed anywhere in the realm. Tackle couldn't stop wondering, did his brother really kick off fencing then, or was it already 3 years earlier? Father nodded and said, since my son isn't happy with his teacher, we're calling on Raymond to straighten this out. After all, he knows there's one more great instructor out there, but before the Lord could even finish his sentence, Dalek cut him off. The son declared this for everyone to hear. Weiss's sword power is at the level of a sword demon. He said this mercenary isn't just any killer, he's ranked higher than his own father ever was. His words slammed straight into the Lord's heart and cut deeper than he ever expected. Your father shot back, I get it all, and left no doubt. He swore he'd update us a little later on whether he could reach an agreement with Weiss, then told both of his sons to hold off until they had a real, final answer, while Dalek flashed his younger brother a sweet, sly smile. They both thanked the Lord and the meeting wrapped up, except father couldn't resist and decided to dig deeper and learn more about Weiss before he left. Once Weiss had earned enough trust, they handed him the job fencing instructor. Then the mercenary himself didn't even hesitate. He was all for it, and Tackle just admitted he felt lucky his brother backed the plan, hoping that support would make him even faster and tougher. He confessed he used to quake at his brother, swore he'd never get in the way of that rising genius, and now he's thinking it was all just plain dumb. Maybe that's why he was so damn thoughtful that day. He shot his brother a mental apology, knowing he'd been bothering him. At a mercenary training ground, Weiss slammed training for the day to a close, and Sullivan Dalek turned to his teacher with a grateful thanks. Kale trained with his brother too, but this time it was brutal, far harder than anything before. He was utterly drained, running on pure fumes. 3 months have slammed by since the Solis Fawn brothers started fencing lessons with Weiss. They hit the training grind 3 times a week, once at the mercenary grounds, then twice more at different sites. Weiss runs a tight ship and might as well be a demon himself, but his eldest son slips into it like he was born for battle, calmly picking up new skills. Tarl swears his brother is already a terrifying swordsman, and Weiss can't even process it. Dalek is learning that fast now that not a single soldier can beat him. Dalek snapped back to his brother that he'd wanted Weiss as their teacher all along, and the hero felt like there was nothing left to say. While his brother the hero was soaring, this kid was painfully weak, so weak he couldn't even stack up to an 8-year-old, and from the very start, even the 1st rank wouldn't let him climb any higher. Even though they both train under the same teacher, they're still on their own paths. After training, Tequila dropped into sleep right there beside the tree. But for everything else, everything besides the fencing, it's going exactly as planned. They've already started shipping refugees over to help develop MT. Tigun first by setting up more inns and shops so the hunters can finally stay there, and it's a tiny step that could spark something huge. Tequila even admitted he'd rather sharpen the walls and turn the whole place into a fortified stronghold. Even the mercenaries are jumping in to build. Right now they're gearing up for the expedition. In 6 months, a construction crew will be deployed, and next year they'll kick off real, full-scale colonization. Thanks to Raymond, things are running smoothly and Tequila can finally breathe. He's glad he chose to trust him. As for Weiss, he's all business, running the field missions, steering those brutal Aesthesian monster hunts, and drilling the Lord's sons to be ready for anything. His mercenaries locked in a 2-year contract, and they're even planning to renew it every year. Just as Takiel starts to sink into his thoughts, bam, someone interrupts him. The older brother figured he'd already had enough rest and challenged him to a quick spar, but the hero flat-out refused. Dalek warned it would just stand there, but the boy shot back that he'd laugh straight in its face. While the brothers bickered and spiraled, Weiss stayed ice-calm, watching the whole scene like she was measuring their next move. Tekwil figured betting on Weiss was the right move, and finally, with the danger past, he let out a huge, clear sigh of relief. Now the hero is gearing up for round 2. The next wave of disasters is coming. In Takel's room, someone burst in and yelled that his order from the workshop had finally arrived. He ordered them to bring it straight to his room, and the boy practically beamed, because the thing they'd sent Carl to craft was already done. He could already feel it, another arrow ready to fly. The army of the Barony of Solis is about to get crushed, big losses that will smash their fighting power, because this is only the 4th plague of the 5 that are about to hit. To make sure it didn't happen, he grabbed that item and used it right away. These weren't just firearms on board, they were built for war, and they had no place on a boat like that. He was already picturing a weapon, one that let him strike from miles away, slice through a soldier's toughest armor, and be used on the spot without any special training. Carl didn't just help, he helped build the whole thing from the ground up. First, they had to crank up bow production, so they crafted a composite bow, then they slapped on metal to smash the range even farther. But only the strongest could even lift a bow like that, so most soldiers stood no chance. Yet Geld made it work. The stocky man threw out a warning, saying this beast would shake your arms to the core, and now it was time to roll with modern technology. They stripped a compound bow for its pulleys, the stuff that yanks the string, then forged a sturdier handle to balance the weight, basically turning it into a crossbow made from compound bow parts. It's been 3 whole years since he first started showing up to that workshop, and while the place was buzzing with water wheels, he stayed locked in, building a prototype of his own. The problem? He couldn't figure out where to hook everything together, so the whole thing never really turned into anything. But protecting your family hits harder than anything else. Tequila confessed that without these feelings, he would have thrown in the towel long ago. He took the gold coins his father gave him and poured them into this project, using the money to dig up better materials and sharpen the whole design. And finally, the prototype bursts out of the workshop, ready to roll. He yanked a massive crossbow straight out of the box. A deadly weapon with almost no training required, an insanely beautiful, insanely powerful crossbow, but so far, they've only managed to make one. Crossbows have existed forever in this world, but nothing like this. Most people don't even use them much, probably because they fire slower than bows. Even back then, crossbows still had cracks. When firearms finally hit Japan, non-stop arguments erupted over what ruled the battlefield, Japanese bows or guns. And guess what? The Middle Ages fought the same war all over again, crossbow versus bow, like the world couldn't decide what was truly stronger. In Kyle's kingdom, archery isn't something you just pick up, it demands real training, but over in the barony, soldiers don't stick to the army alone. With crossbows, it's that simple: lock on, pull the trigger, and let the shot speak. Tequila even pulled Raymond aside and warned him to keep the crossbow's secrets away from everyone, while the kid was already itching to loose another arrow. 2 days later, at the mercenary training grounds, Takiel showed up and met his teacher face to face. Weiss leaned in and greeted the young gentleman with a sharp, confident smile. The mercenary stared at the object in the boy's hands, snapped, "What do you have there?" then told her, "I only helped carry it." Takiel started tearing into the package, insisting he just wanted to show him something and finally get his honest opinion. Weiss stared at the device before him, stunned out of his mind. The gentleman leaned in and started explaining, "Yeah, this wasn't your average crossbow. It was brand new, packed with special details, and crafted by skilled artisans who poured their craft into every improvement." Weiss instantly clocked it, a crossbow. It wasn't used much in the kingdom, but the moment he saw it, he had it figured out, and the look on his face screamed that he'd already pinned down every one of its weak spots. Tekwil grinned and begged Weiss to take a swing at it, just so he could finally hear what she thought. Weiss snatched the crossbow and leveled it, zeroing in on his target. With all his hard-earned skill, he lined up his crossbow and aimed true. The other heroes leaned in, holding their breath, ready to see what he'd do next. The moment he yanked the trigger, the arrow tore through the air like lightning. Dalek and Weiss stared in shock, blown away by just how fast that weapon could unleash its power. Weiss sprinted straight up to the target, spun around to face it, and then paused in stunned confusion, totally lost. The mercenary charged the child, clamped his shoulders, and screamed that if there were even more crossbows out there, they had to grab them right now, because he was determined to arm every single mercenary with them. Tequila finally spilled it. He just couldn't wait to tell his father after hearing what the mercenary said. He pointed out that this was the only prototype they'd managed to finish, and Weiss quickly apologized, admitting he'd gotten way too emotional. Weiss admitted he couldn't believe how lethal this weapon was. An arrow like that could slice through any armor, even the mighty gear of the best Griffonian cavalry, and he told the boy, "Go tell your father, I'm ready to buy those crossbows." Then Terrell got jumped by his older brother, who dropped to his knees and begged to be allowed to shoot, so the hero agreed without hesitation. His brother kept firing without a single pause until Anne finally stepped in and snapped at him to stop. The very next day at the estate, the heir to recovery thanked his parents for every moment they'd given him. He bowed his head, apologizing for sweeping the whole family together out of nowhere, but he had one thing burning in his heart: he wanted them to see something. Takiel motioned at the Dalek. Now it was his turn, and the boy gripped a crossbow tight in both hands. Baron Solis' family courtyard, where a Dalek hunched in firing stance, ready to blast the kid brother's upgraded crossbow with one brutal shot. And then he let it rip. His arrow shot out in an instant, blazing straight through the air. The whole family froze in disbelief at what they were staring at. Dalek roared with joy over the perfect shot, while his father just stood there, stunned by what he was seeing. The Lord muttered, wondering what that form and power even meant, then snapped at his son, asking if Tashel had gone and read something from books again. He broke down how every piece came from totally different mechanisms. Then they tested it today and marched it over to Weiss for his take, and Weiss basically said that one crossbow could punch straight through even Griffonian cavalry armor. But rage surged in his father's chest because he hadn't told him about that weapon first. Then Tequila fired up the next part of his show, bragging that even a brand new soldier could pick up this crossbow and master it fast, and he truly believed it was the perfect choice. Lord Tahil didn't just agree, he doubled down, claiming he was right, and then someone shouted his name, Lord Tahil. Raymond snapped that the crossbow's biggest flaw was its low rate of fire compared to a bow. Then he stared at the boy and demanded, "So what do you say about that?" This will kick off the campaign against the war looming on the horizon. Takeda and Dalek didn't budge, and they dropped a proposal. The eldest son declared that Tackle's new weapon would arm the whole army, because the Empire's iron cavalry was the danger stalking them right now. They're completely helpless as their attackers come crashing in. Archers can't slip through their armor, but this crossbow tears right through sheet metal like it's nothing. Right now, the army has roughly 400 soldiers, and if every single one of them got a crossbow like that, they'd be ready to tear into anyone they face. The son swore the secret of this crossbow's creation would die with it. He vowed to lock away the design so nobody ever learns it. They didn't just aim to mass-produce that crossbow, they planned to flood the whole lands with it, because if even 10% of the people can wield it, that's a massive edge. The Lord straight up called it the perfect move. Tackle said he finally gets it, making 800 shooters isn't some walk in the park. Then he pitched a wild idea, building a shooting range where people could train with regular crossbows. They planned to use the shooting range to drill soldiers and let regular folks join in for fun, then use that excitement to seed a future militia with little prizes and all. Tequila's parents finally spilled the truth. She had an awesome proposal where people could practice their shooting and win prizes. And he went on to promise that their skills would skyrocket, turning them into deadly, top-tier shooters. The Lord couldn't stop thinking about one wild idea: ordinary people stepping into a real, full-scale army. Delic said he tested the crossbow yesterday and loved every second of pulling the trigger. Now he's sure this plan could actually work. Tekwil nodded and admitted his brother was right. If they wanted prizes, they'd have to land every hit on the target. Then they'll kick off monthly tournaments where everyone goes head-to-head, and the third stage is the big one, a massive showdown packed with the top performers from those monthly fights. In the fourth stage, they'll set up bets for the tournament, then the winners will cash out and use that money to fund the tournament setup and its prizes. Here practically burst out that they'd build a system open to everyone, and if they could even pull off a tournament, the results would be amazing. Then he finally turned to his father and asked what he thought. Over time, that tournament could turn into the big special event everyone in their territory looks forward to, and they'd use the show to whip the locals into a force that's begging to come knocking on their door. And when it came to his opinion, he admitted the idea was damn brilliant. The hero thought, so this is it, merchant blood is finally waking my father up, and his dad started believing their idea could actually rake in money. But then it hit him, he never even answered the servant's question. Sure, a crossbow fires slower than a bow, but it all boils down to how you use it. Switching between units keeps the guns blazing without pause. When one soldier fires, he shoves back to make room, and the whole line cycles like a drumbeat. Fire, readiness, reload. Oda Nobunaga used this move long ago. It let them slam back iron cavalry with ease, and Tackle insisted it would make up for the slower fire rate since you'd have a whole swarm of archers raining shots. Raymond's eyes widened at the kid's words. He actually believed this could work. The Dalek bragged that not even a master swordsman could survive it, and the younger brother shot back, I can handle this, then added, and anyway, those arrows will shred any armor you've got. Tequila fired up the family and demanded they picture just how unstoppable their army could be. He then told her clear as day that he hadn't even spilled this to Weiss yet. The two brothers locked eyes and grinned at each other like they already knew what came next. Raymond declared that the Lord finally caved in, then he didn't even bother arguing back. The kid's mother plastered on a bright smile and acted like nothing was wrong, but you could feel the tension coiled in her. The gentleman barked Raymond's name into the air. He ordered his servant to churn out these crossbows in secret mass production but tightly under wraps, while they also planned to set up a shooting range where the regular crossbows would be used. The servant got the message instantly. Tequila was told to whip up a list of everything the shooting range needed to run, and then his father handed him the power to hire whoever they'd require. He hands the weapons research and battle tactics to the Dalek, and his father warns him, stay sharp, because if even one scrap of information slips into the wrong hands, everything could explode. In the end, the Lord slammed the decision down. Every last expense would be paid from the regional funds, and that was the final word. Sola's brothers erupted in pure joy after crushing the win. Then Tequila dropped the truth. Weiss wanted that kind of crossbow for himself, and that's exactly why he'd cooked up the idea. They'll try to cut his pay with crossbows, but only if he keeps quiet and never spills the crossbow secrets. Meanwhile, they'll unleash the new models on monsters to see what needs fixing. If they nodded yes, they'd be some of the very first to draw their crossbows, and that would earn them future instructors to teach everyone how to shoot, and Lord snapped that it was a brilliant idea. Dalek was stunned when his little brother learned how to work people with that kind of finesse, while Tackle mentally shot back, I just had to wiggle. Next, the eldest son pushed his father to take a shot with the crossbow, and their mother didn't bat an eye. Tequila figured, if we strike now, we'll buy time to go toe-to-toe with the Iron Army, and that meant the whole land had to be ready too, because their own soldiers alone wouldn't be enough, and when bandits and monsters come crawling out, they'll have to fight those threats as well. If humans ever step up as a real force, there's nothing left to fear, and we can pack even more soldiers into war the moment it starts. Dalek barked, don't worry, I'm a great shot for a first-timer. The eldest son urged him to aim higher first, and the mother couldn't resist. She wanted to try shooting too. Raymond was grinning, soaking in the Lord's success with the crossbow. The key you thought everyone loved, when he saw it click into place, relief hit him hard and he knew his whole plan was finally moving. That was the spark of a brand new future, solo shooters taking their very first step toward legendary glory. And just like that, they christened the new crossbow, naming it the *Hester crossbow ***. In the city of Est, inside a cramped little workshop, smiths pounded metal in full swing. Then the door burst open and someone stepped in. Soli's brothers and Anne burst into the workshop, and Keith went wide-eyed. There were even more people inside than before. One of the craftsmen stepped forward to greet the master. Eld, the workshop's boss, lit up and thanked his youngest son for showing up to see him. He called out that a true gentleman had arrived to see them, and every man straightened up, bowed low, and paid the Lord's son the respect he commanded. But when Takil got hit with that greeting, a weird unease crawled up his spine, yet Jel didn't buy it at all and brushed him off, asking what they'd come for. Takil said he just wanted to see how Esther Crossbow's products were made. The moment it dropped, he couldn't sit still. He had to talk about the new product right away. He snapped his fingers and called Carl over right away, but Takwil's worry flared. Don't make this urgent. We can talk about it when we've got time. The boy snapped that his work mattered more, but held shot back that the water mill and crossbows were still his finest creations. He insisted these were his ideas, and that meant they had to listen, because that was their job too. Kia's chest practically buzzed with satisfaction after hearing those words. It acted totally weird, like something had snapped. Inside the workshop, Held led everyone into a hidden room and pulled his guests in with him. Tequila was convinced there had to be another room where they could finally talk in peace, without bothering a single soul. Then the boy thrust the drawing into their hands and demanded they look closely. The guys leaned in and demanded to know what it was. The boy said it was a one-shot crossbow, but it wasn't some emergency project, so they needed to stay focused on cranking out the Esther crossbows first. He pointed out exactly where the bolts would sit, then slammed the lever to reload the crossbow. At the exact same moment, the bowstring snaps back and the bolt launches like a shot out of a cannon. People still swear Juge's crossbow existed, though no one can prove it, but they claim Juge Liang invented it. Takwil stared at the ratifier problem and thought, why not build it and see if it finally cracks? He confessed he had a whole stash of hobbies, and one of his favorites was his deep obsession with the Three Kingdoms era and the entire continent that came with it. The boy figured he could finally grip this crossbow for real, and the craftsman immediately started grilling him for every production detail. They huddled over the sketches and tore into ideas on how to build the invention, with Geld barking for the tools to be brought right now, until Taxel suddenly panicked and screamed at them to stop. He tried to calm them down, saying this could wait, because the Esther crossbows had to be handled right now, and he demanded they keep their mouths shut about it. The men leaned in and demanded the boy trust them completely. He and his brother decided to dig into Esther crossbow production, swap a few parts for metal, so they marched straight to blacksmiths and placed an order. Now they can brace for the coming war and harden the borders. Tekelchil was sure they'd pull it off in time. Weiss lit up because mass production was finally clicking. They handed a huge pile of crossbows to mercenaries, and then he personally met the Lord to hammer out the deal. Esther crossbows had to step in and drill the soldiers with non-stop training sessions. Next fall, a deadline crashes in and a brutal war erupts between neighbors. They might snatch victory, but chances are they'll still be wiped out, losing about 40% of their soldiers. This time, it wasn't going to be the same at all. Esther's crossbows were built to chew up the Empire's iron cavalry, and with enough archers in their ranks, they could finally hold them back. Still, the real charge would be led by Weiss, the one who'd seize victory and become the victorious general. In the future, the whole country will crumble, because it won't be able to fight back and it will lose. But somehow he can't shake the feeling that Goldman's not fighting for them, so he knows he's got to make his own move. Every single day keeps crawling into his head, and the thought that it's all pointless just won't let him go. Tequila grabs his brother and asks what's wrong. His brother snaps back that it's his magic. The younger son guesses it's light magic, the rarest stuff even beyond the kingdom, and the Dalek confirms, yeah, that's exactly it. But then he leaned in and told his younger brother to grumble just a bit, and he spilled every last detail to him. Akid's eyes went wide in total shock. She snapped at her younger brother, yelling that it was all true, because if it wasn't, he never would have run to complain to her in the first place. The Lord's second son made up his mind. He had to go talk to Weiss. They all agreed to talk to their father first, because if they didn't, he'd start swearing again. Now Takwil felt even more certain they'd wipe out the Iron Cavalry for good. In the autumn of 502, the horsemen rode into Est, and the moment finally hit. Time to fight was here. In the 502nd year of the Kyle era, the Griffonian Empire's Marquis Goff surged in and slammed into the kingdom of Kyle, so border Baron Hasteberg rallied troops from nearby aristocrats and met him at the border. The Viscount Hieronymus' forces got smashed so badly that the front flank teetered on breaking open. Then Baron Solis' men got left standing alone, taking a brutal hit, losing as much as 40%, yet they still fought like monsters and clung to the line. With too many dead, the royal army finally stopped cold, and the imperial troops couldn't keep the war going. Both nations shout they've won, but the border ground is drenched in the fallen's blood, and Estel's people sob through the pain. In the last days of that blistering summer, a frantic messenger from border Baron Hasteberg bursts into Est. Spies are already screaming about a Griffonian Empire invasion, so snap up troops fast, march straight to the Southern Gate fortress and smash the enemy right there on the border before they even breathe. The hero finally felt it. Trial time was here. The Lord had swept up 215 standing warriors and 335 militiamen from all over the country, 550 men total, with some kept back as guards. Baron Solis came with 360 warriors, plus a mercenary squad of 40 double-headed eagles. They charged for the Southgate plain. This time the barons got double the usual men. It wasn't the full 600 a Viscount would command, but the battle lines were perfectly even. Tikale and his family stood there, hearts pounding, as the army finally marched out of Est. The entire family stood there, watching their loved ones march off to war. During break-in training, he couldn't stop thinking, did his father ever reach the battlefield? Ekwil was 9, begged to ride with the army, and got shut down on the spot. His parents sat him down and swore that war wasn't some kid's game. It wasn't anything like what he'd imagined. He knew this war wasn't for kids, and once he felt the weight of it in his bones, he had to be there. Because history says Baron Solis' army got smashed, losing a brutal 40% of its strength in this very battle, and that fact haunted him nonstop. This time, no more of the old outcome. Baron Solis' army had a new weapon, something nobody had ever seen before. The war genius Invincible General Weiss Esther's crossbows shredding the Empire cavalry's iron armor, and this time the cavalry was bigger than ever. Weiss's ruthless tactics and his elite fighters could flip even the worst battle on its head, especially after the boy warned him about every danger and technique the Empire's cavalry might throw at them. They've wiped out separate archer units in Baron Rainia. Now every single warrior, even the cavalry, rides out with Esther crossbows. And the best part, even a plain militiaman can load and aim one, so the power of precise long-range shots stays right where it belongs. 2 years ago, when grain prices skyrocketed and famine gripped country after country, people started butchering horses for meat or cashing them out for grain, so my father seized the chaos and snapped up a pile of military horses. And somehow he cooked up solid excuses to dodge any serious suspicion, claiming it was for resettlement, for evacuating the residents from the outer outskirts. Because of that deal, the double-headed eagle got paid in horses, flipped into a real cavalry force, and the standing army suddenly had tons of mounted fighters, while that one tiny detachment of barely 100 horsemen has now doubled, topping 200 with mercenaries in the mix. They've pushed every option as far as they can, but Takhill is still just a kid, and Yama can only sit there waiting for word, and it hurts like hell. He could only pray they'd somehow make it through this brutal fourth plague. Everyone was convinced they'd make it out of this fight alive. Borderlands, Southgate Plain, the kingdom of Kyle's army on the southern flank, the ruthless alliance of Baron Solis and Cornell, and Milord Darren stared straight into the distance like something big was about to break. Weiss rolled in with the news. Camp fortifications were finished, trench lines and deadly traps all set, and the Lord slapped him with a grateful thanks after he explained an earth mage borrowed from Baron Cornell helped make it happen. The mercenary leaned in and asked if this war really had roots in the Empire's succession crisis, and the Lord nodded. Then Weiss hit him with the real scoop. The rumor said the First Prince's backers were betting everything on a Hail Mary, even though they'd racked up 0 real wins so far, and while the prince stayed out of the fight, only Marquis Good stepped into the battle. This was a total nightmare for them. Then the Lord nodded in agreement, and Weiss fired back, asking what he'd say about the troops' disposition. The Lord shot back, "They've got around 7,000 men, basically the same number as us. They lined up in a fish-scale formation, ready to surge forward, while the Lord picked the shape of a crane's wing, aiming to wrap around and clash with them head-on. The plan sounded solid, but it was way too risky." I snapped, "What are you trying to pull?" The mercenary snapped back that there was no guarantee the enemy would march the way they planned, because they might not rush straight into the center at all. He said the commanders had grabbed those killer hill positions, but it only stretched the wings out too far, too thin, and made it impossible for even the biggest wings to move together in perfect sync. The mercenary figured the enemy would chop them up piece by piece, sweeping in from the right flank and grinding toward the left. If the enemy smashes even one wing, he'll slam into the flank and rear of the main force, cutting off every path back and trapping them completely. Weiss slammed the conclusion down hard. If that was the plan, the army was finished. He kept saying they'd built a ring that was way too big, thin, shallow, and easy to break through, with no way for their units to coordinate, so allies would just freeze and do nothing instead of fighting, and with equal forces that one mistake was deadly. He was laser-focused on the right flank, where Viscount Guman and Hiromi's troops were posted. Tension is poison here. These lords glare at each other with mistrust and outright hostility. He tried to finish his thought, but the lord cut him off. Then Solas snapped back that they'd been treating each other like sworn enemies for ages. If the enemy funnels all their forces into the right flank, Solis and Cornell's outer troops will get cut off, easy prey. The lord can't shake the feeling that this is going to hell fast, and that you've got to fear not just your enemies but even your own allies. If the Viscounts try to settle old grudges and even backpedal a little under the heat, the heroes will step right into a trap. The lord backs it up. This danger is real, no doubt. Weiss nods along, certain the enemy can feel his fear too. Goat's iron cavalry is the enemy's main force, and they swagger like they can't be stopped. Once they clash head-on with your front, you won't be able to hold your ground. Weiss didn't just speak, he proved every word he said. But if they say yes right away, they might finally tap into that self-confidence and make it count. They've also got Baron Cornell, fortifications top dog, so his troops have already hammered out rock-solid positions. Weiss shot back that 400 of his men were loaded with Estro crossbows, and now they had 200 cavalry on top of that, something they never had before. And finally, they pull out a secret tactic that flips everything. Their allies have no clue about her, but once she steps in, they'll finally stand their ground with real force. And right on the left flank, the brave Viscount Curious is already in position. If he rams the attack and slams that wing shut, they'll trap the enemy in an encirclement. Then they'll flip the entire battle in the blink of an eye. Weiss clocked the lord's weird grin and felt something off instantly. The lord swore he never regretted naming Weiss as his advisor. He'd heard the barons and their sons plead for him, and Takiel had been downright relentless about it. He couldn't figure out why his son was acting like this, yet even he admitted he'd been thinking the exact same thing from the very start. Mercenary bowed low, calling it an incredible honor, and right then the enemy launched its attack. And just like that, the clash that history would name the Battle of the Southgate exploded into motion, because at that exact moment, the war finally erupted. At the Raphonian Army HQ, Marquis Goat strode in and told them, clear as day, the kingdom of Kyle had lined up for battle just like he predicted. You were sure they couldn't even figure out why they'd been handed that hill territory in the first place. The Marquis is certain his enemies aren't plotting offense at all, they're just thinking of defense, so he charges them up the hill, assuming this advantage ground is theirs to claim. Goat was told to follow the plan exactly. While the center and right army tore into the enemy to draw them in, the left wing held back until it could smash the enemy's right flank. He held the iron cavalry back in reserve, so when the time finally hit, they'd burst through and smash their right wing to pieces. Viscount Gomez and Viscount Hiorina's troops thundered straight into the battlefield. Weiss clocked that the enemy had stayed on their planned trail, then barked orders. Every Baron unit had to get ready for a brutal long-range salvo. Sniper teams lock onto their assigned spots and everyone stays put until the signal finally hits. The mercenary snapped his orders and demanded that every troop hear exactly what he said. He snapped to the truth. Somehow the enemy clocked that their right flank was shoved together crookedly. The center and left wing still kept them in bow range, sure, but the real punch was landing on the right. Main force would pour in, outnumber them fast, and crush the flank piece by piece. Everything's sliding into place because the enemy's plotting a brutal move. Smash the two Viscounts' lines, then flood in the iron cavalry to patch up what's left, and finally hit the headquarters where it's most exposed. Weiss decided numbers ruled the battlefield, and on top of that, the Viscount's troops were already crumbling from sheer demoralization. The lord just shrugged it off, saying all of this was only a question of time. Hiorimi's troops were getting crushed by sheer force, trapped and trembling as they waited for the retreat order, because the enemy kept pouring in and there was just too many. Weiss cursed. Meanwhile, at the Graphonian army headquarters, the Marquis spotted that one flank had already caved in, no shock thanks to their tiny numbers, but still, a few stubborn soldiers refused to budge. The Marquis screamed for the rivals to be boxed in and wiped out, but the Goat army's troops spat about how pathetic the Hiorimi army looked. Goat figured he was about to get swarmed by 2,000 soldiers, so many that there was no way they could hold out. He slammed the order to retreat, keeping the front line locked in. Baron Solis and Cornell's men realized Hiorimi's army was coming apart at the seams, and Viscount Gomez's troops started slipping backward too. Weiss declared it was finally time to fire the signal. A brand new chapter of history is about to be written right here. Right here, right now, the thing that was always meant to start is finally kicking off. In Graphonia's army HQ, Marquis Gott's turf, he erupted in laughter at his opponent's pathetic act, while his comrade praised it as proof of his master's sharp insight and the grit of his soldiers. And the Marquis smirked and vowed to hit his enemies with one final, unforgettable lesson. He slammed the command and ordered the Iron Army to move. The Iron Cavalry rode straight for the battlefield, and Goat ordered them to smash the enemy's right flank, sweep around their side, and come back with the head of the border Marquis. He decided to begin with the ones who were standing right on the edge, trembling at the brink. The Marquis slammed down the order, "Destroy the enemy, no mercy." Soulless men screamed as the Iron Cavalry barreled toward them, but the reinforcements from the center never showed up, so they couldn't push forward toward the Marquis. This is the battlefield, one blink and everything changes. Lord Darren has orders to obey. Their armed soldiers snapped to attention, holding their breath as they waited for the next command. The Lord's son figured his father had defended this spot 100 times before, so he snapped his orders: have the soldiers check their arrows, knock them, duck behind the inner rampart, and wait for his signal. The soldiers froze when they realized Lord Dalek, as a kid, was right there beside them. The boy got the orders to crash into the vanguard the second he gave the signal. The oldest son freaked out, convinced everyone was staring, his heart hammered in his chest, even though the whole place stayed eerily quiet. Weiss snapped him out of his doubts and said, "Don't falter, if you hold steady, we win." Even though fear clawed at Dalek, he forced himself to steady his nerves and stand his ground. He snapped his right hand out straight and held his breath, waiting for the moment to hit. As the Iron Cavalry thundered closer, he finally snapped and made his move. Weiss roared that they had to slam the attack into the right-hand second sector, and the Daleks snapped to obey. The Lord's oldest son had total faith in himself and in his younger brother, Teatchel. Months before the war, in Baron Soli's grand mansion courtyard, the Dalek fretted that his spell might be totally useless. He was sure light was useless for a real fight unless it snapped over someone's eyes and left them helpless. The Dalek insisted that if Tekiel wasn't a swordsman, then he'd have to rely on the magic he'd been keeping, while his elder brother fretted that all that light would amount to nothing, just empty study of its brilliance. And Tequila leaned in and told him to try one thing, sending light. Dalek obeyed. He hurled a blazing orb of light straight ahead. The moment that ball ignited, it blazed so bright it practically flooded their mom's office with light. Even though the Dalek felt let down by the magic, Takuro was blown away. It was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen. The youngest son swore to his brother that this was incredible magic, insisting they show it to their father, and even though the Lord stayed calm, the very next day they still chose to test it on their mentor. The very next day at the training grounds near Est, Tekwil practically bounced with excitement, begging the master to let him show off his magic. His younger brother was grinning like crazy, even if Dalek swore it was just a blinding flash of light, because the moment he could, he wanted to get back home ASAP. Then Tequila pitched the idea of unleashing that blaze right in front of the galloping horse. Those youngest son words hit Weiss like a hammer. Suddenly she understood exactly what he meant, and she even figured out why they'd chosen to head out into the field this time. When horsemen charge at full speed, a sudden loss of sight can flip the entire battle on its head. Weiss said that Dalek magic could be a brutally powerful weapon. After that, the eldest son pushed his training harder and harder, forcing his light to streak farther and hit with brutal precision, until, little by little, he finally started to see exactly what Tequila was setting in motion. Magic is so rare it might as well be a myth. Inside the kingdom it barely exists, and in the Empire it's even worse. Most mages are born with it, bloodline gifts that stick to noble families, so those special people never get thrown into the front lines, meaning nobody ever expects magic to show up in a war. Tequila meant. But here's the twist: Dalek's request to join the battle got flat-out rejected, and the son turned to his parents, demanding answers. Why? His father swore he'd get him to the battlefield one day, but right then, too soon, not yet. Even though the boy proved to his parents that his magic could crush the Iron Cavalry army, they still looked at him and saw how brutally hard he'd been training. But his mother shot him a promise right away. He was only 12, and she swore she'd never let her eldest son be dragged to a place where blood was flying. The Lord snapped at his wife to stop, and Dalek immediately freaked out, because he couldn't handle what his mother would do. The hero dug in his heels against his parents and screamed at the entire room, declaring he wasn't going along with it. He confessed that back when Tahil was younger and everyone worshipped him, jealousy had clawed at him, and it still felt unfair. Then Dalek watched him and he finally saw the truth. His brother was strict, sure, but he was dead honest. The hero finally understood why his brother was pushing himself so hard and why that savage, burning envy was ripping him apart. He swore it wasn't stubbornness or pride. And on top of all that, he still had one priceless wish burning in his chest. All that mattered to him was one thing: he'd do anything to keep his family safe. Right here in the middle of the chaos, a Dalek's light ball exploded into a searing flash, blinding every soldier around it, cavalry included. The enemy army never saw that move coming. Then their soldiers started getting knocked off their horses, one after another. Their horses wouldn't settle, and they fought to calm them down before things spiraled. Nobody could even figure out what that insane flash of light was supposed to be. Some folks swore the horses had actually slipped off the edge. Weiss snapped that tiny thing into place, and boom, the enemy horses crumpled onto the ground, every bump and every hole silently tipping the balance. All the gunners behind the Dalek were roaring with joy, having smashed the enemy's iron cavalry, and they were showering praise on the boy. At the time, the Marquis of Hasselberg got word that his iron cavalry had been wiped out, and it screamed that Baron Solis was plotting something big, so the Marquis couldn't stop wondering what was coming next. Bake heard the rumors too. Those armies were coming, and everyone swore there was a crack of solace waiting somewhere. Gout's army erupted into panic because even the Marquis himself couldn't wrap his head around it. A full third of the iron cavalry was knocked out, and the so-called invincible force had been crushed that easily it felt like sheer madness. Lord Dalek was told his magic was absolutely magnificent. Weiss leaned in and praised the boy the moment his tears spilled, because for once good fortune actually found him. The father ruffled the boy's hair, then told him, "Don't worry, we'll take care of the rest ourselves." Only a third of the enemy army was left standing, regrouping for the second phase, and then the command hit. Every long-range unit, lock in and ready a devastating salvo. Dalek Solis, the eldest son of Baron Solis, later earned the title Saint of the Sword, the Swordsman of Light. His very first battle turned into a blazing wind, light spilling everywhere, while the Imperial army got crushed, and they didn't even realize how much it would hurt until the fight was already underway. Dalek shot a grim look at his younger brother and told him, in no uncertain terms, that he'd thrown everything he had at it.